what I'm going to show you today is the culmination of probably 2 weeks of work playing with the PVM patches developed at Alibaba Cloud. And what these allow you to do is to virtualize on machines where there's no hardware virtualization available, where you're in a regular cloud VM, and nested virtualization is also not an option. And it does this through page table, through the page tables. So what we'll do is, first of all, we'll create an EC2 instance, and this is going to be just a regular one. It's not going to be bare metal, and as you can see, the cost of this particular one, just go for something like an M6A. What did I pick? 8 vCPU, 32 gigs of RAM, 70 cents an hour. If we were gonna go to bare metal with this one, that would be $11 an hour. So a lot more expensive. I'm gonna pick one of my keys. I only want SSH into here, and I want a pretty big root drive. So we'll get this launched. And then I just want to have a shortcut so I don't have to keep typing in the PEM file when we're using SSH. Okay. So we're in. The kernel that is on here already is 6.8. We need to update it to my kernel that I've recompiled. And the way I did this was I looked at boot, and there was a config here for a working kernel for this kind of guest on AWS. And this may or may not be important depending what cloud you're on, is there may be settings in here that are needed for the hypervisor AWS is using. And when you're on, for instance, Azure or some other cloud, you may have to get the original config, bring that back to your machine, apply the configuration settings for PVM, build the kernel, etc., etc. And so that's what I've actually done. And then what I'm going to do is download my packages that just happen to be on an inlets tunnel at the moment because it's a bit more convenient for me. These are Debian packages, so we can just install them directly on the host. And we'll get the guest kernel that I built in pretty much the same way. Normal working Firecracker, basic minimal configuration, added the PVM settings. Right, now let's get these installed. Once installed, we'll get a new grub entry. Then we have to update grub to know to pick this kernel. Right. It is in boot, grub config. We just grep this file from the word menu, and this will help us build up the string that we need. So we need advanced options, more than symbol, and then we're looking for our new kernel option. This is a string that we'll put in the defaults file now. And then we'll run grub update, and before we know it, we'll have this kernel running. The other thing we're going to want on here is we're probably going to need some way of starting up Firecracker. I have my own tooling for this. And then there's also my Firecracker lab that you're welcome to try out. That will also work here. So we're in the new kernel, and we can mod probe KVM now and KVM PVM, which then means we have KVM, so we can launch a patched hypervisor, which is something you've just never been able to do on normal EC2. Okay, now the other thing that I just did there is I copied up. I can do this slightly differently. Run tmux inside the instance. I copied up this slicer program, and that is something that we've written here at OpenFAS. We use it for large-scale testing, so we can boot up hundreds of VMs almost instantly, install a large Kubernetes cluster, test OpenFAS with many, many nodes, test our operators, that kind of thing. We've also used it on bare metal to slice it up into VMs, run Kubernetes there in production, host a load of websites, have that level of isolation. Now, you saw me type in the word actuated. That is a product that we built 2022 originally, and it launches secure one-shot VMs for CI use cases. We're not actually going to use it, but we are going to use its tooling to install Firecracker and a few other dependencies that we want. Whilst we're waiting for that, let's have our look at this minimal configuration. What it does is it will set up a number of hosts, in this instance 1, with 4 vCPUs each, 16 gigs of RAM, and a static IP. It will pre-install my GitHub SSH keys, which is ideal, and it will use our patched kernel. Let's just check what we've got on here. We've actually got 8 and 32 gigs of RAM, so we'll bump that up a little bit. Of course, we could just run 2 of these if we wanted instead. Once this has unpacked the image, it can then boot VMs pretty much instantly. And we will start to see if everything went all right. A slicer directory will appear for logs, and we'll get the serial console of the first VM. There it is. Booted up. 2 seconds. Pretty nice. And you know, that is slower because it accessed GitHub, it downloaded my SSH keys, it installed them in this machine. And then I don't want to actually install my SSH keys on the EC2 instance, so instead I'm going to actually use it as a jump box. I'm going to jump into it from here. I've done that in the past with the same IP, so I just need to remove this old host. Start again. There we are. I'm inside the machine. We can run commands. We saw that patched kernel. We're literally inside of it. Those are the processes that are running. We've got the RAM, etc. allocated. Now, what I tend to like to do is just run, you know, a basic workload. Let's go install some packages to build a kernel. And the kernel that we're going to build will actually be the LTS kernel. But we're going to do it in such a way that we turn pretty much everything off. We don't really need to see how long it takes to build a massive bloated kernel, but we want something consistent that we can run pretty much anywhere. And this is the same thing that I did in the blog post. So the code's checking out now. Once that's checked out, we can set up the configuration, which is the very basic empty configuration. That's what all no config does. So it's about as minimum as you can get away with. And then we'll run the make with -j and proc, which means it's going to run with the 8 vCPUs that are available. Now, I have run this on the host in all my testing, and it can be anywhere for this test between 30 seconds to a minute faster on the host. But when you were doing that, you were not getting any virtualization, right? And so that's really the trade-off here. If you use KVM where it's available because it's bare metal, it is almost as fast as the host. There's very little overhead at all. With this approach, there is some overhead, right? It is there for CI, perhaps because of the way it uses the page table, and that's where the VMs are running. That may be why it's a bit more of overhead. For long-running Node.js web server, Java web server, which is what Alibaba Cloud use it for primarily, it may actually be unnoticeable in the long run. So we're crunching through it. And if we have a look on the host, I bet we'll see all those CPUs are getting slammed by Firecracker, as you can see there. And the RAM isn't actually fully utilized. Kernel build, at least in my experience, doesn't tend to saturate RAM, but it does saturate the CPU. So we were all the way up there. And it looks like it just finished. Well, 1 minute 34, which is actually pretty respectable for the specs of this machine. So if there's anything that you specifically are interested in, if there's something that you want to know, you want to see, reach out to me. I've tried this on Hetzner. I've tried it on Google Cloud. And there's a pretty detailed blog post about what I found that you'll be able to go look at as well on blog Alex Ellis. This is where I have the most of the details. And yeah, I have run this fully end-to-end through Actuated as well. So we just used Slicer because it gave us a quick and easy way to launch a long-lived VM, do experimentation interactively. But as you see from the screenshot up top there, run this through Actuated as well. And that is actually a pretty decent way to do benchmarking, because I was able to set the EC2 instance up against a Hetzner machine, up against a bare metal host, my own computer, have them all build exactly the same in parallel and come back with their build times. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the demo. Go have a look at the blog post. There'll be a link in the video to that. And keep an eye out, see if this actually gets released into the mainline kernel. If you want to know about Slicer, Actuated, again, you can probably reach me on X.